IVM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey. Do you often dream about leading a more creative life? Whether you wanted to be a painter, a dancer, a cricketer, or a photographer. Maybe you wanted to play games for a living. Growing up, financial responsibilities often take us away from our true passions. Now imagine if you could explore that creativity while still making sure that your family is financially secure. Find a way for the artist and the realist within us to coexist. Karo pure apne irade, apno se kiye sabhi waade. SBI Life apne liye, apno ke liye. To know more about our insurance plans with wealth creation, log on to www.sbilife.co.in. IRDAI registration number 111.
Hello and welcome to Simblified, the show where the points don't matter. No, wait, that's whose line is it anyway? Welcome to the show that is on behavior that's on politics, behavioral science. No, wait, that's the seen and the unseen. Welcome to the show that's about the hidden side of everything. No, sorry, that's Freakonomics. Welcome to the best piece of fiction. No, wait, that is the show on the Constitution, the US one, of course. Welcome to a show that does not have an opening yet. And that's the one that sounds like Simplified. Yes, sorry, had to bring it back home eventually. Hi, guys.
Amazing. Hi.
This is also the show that the government has not been able to regulate yet. Much like the Big Four. Okay, anyway.
And by government, just to be clear, we are talking about government as an abstract concept and not any. It could be the government of Simplified, government of IBM,
Ministry of Silly Walks.
Yeah. Ministry of Silly Walks. Yes, that's right. That's right. The Ministry of Silly Walks is indeed the government that we are under. So anyway, guys, today we are going to talk about big technology platforms. So it only makes sense to ask you what your first social media profile looked like.
Wow. Hi, I'm Srikeit, and it has to be Orkut for me. Orkut was the first one, and the only thing I remember is just getting a bunch of weird testimonials from a bunch of friends that was on my profile. I don't remember any of the interests or any other crap that I put there. But I remember exchanging scraps with a bunch of my cousin used to be insane on Orkut, and she used to she wrote me some 5 testimonials, and she was a kid, she was young, she's younger than me. So she was a kid, and she put all of these, we used to exchange scraps and all that stuff. And I mean, scraps is about right, because I remember Orkut being an absolute trash can anyway. because it was just even back then, even when we didn't have a clean, at least early Facebook clean world, I think my memory is just totally revolving around Orkut just being total trash. It was like this trashy message board that where the UX was terrible, and the interface was just garbage with garish colors all over the place. And that dirty pink color that it was there around Orkut. I was just Orkut, I remember it to be great concept, but extremely terrible execution.
Wow. Okay. That was a scathing review. Tony?
Yeah, I think my first social network was High Five, but I don't remember anything about it. But I think Orkut was the one where I spent a lot of time on. It had some really cool features which, took a while for for instance, you could mark someone as you have a crush on them. And if they did the same to you, they'd send you a mail. Which goes.
You never reciprocated to mine, by the way. Just saying.
You know what the mail said? Take a deep breath and ponder this. Orkut has unmasked a shared affection and showed twin wounds from Cupid's darts. But while we aid in love's detection, its future path lies twixt your hearts. So this is the mail that
you have a mail. You have this mail, and you just search for it. Okay, so
we have to. The way to search for it is the word twixt, which no one ever uses.
Yeah,
in any other context.
except for very exotic kind of pastries used. But
There's a famous Ogden Nash poem. The turtle lives betwixt plated decks that practically conceal its sex. I think it's clever of the turtle in such a fix to be so fertile. Fertile is the American way of saying fertile.
The sad part of this entire thing is I'm very sure that Naren recalled that from memory, and Tony, whatever he read out, had to read it from mail. Brilliant. This is all you need to know about Simplified. Anyway, so mine also was...
That's how old Naren is. He needs to remember stuff.
He comes from an oral tradition.
I like that. I like the testimonials feature on Orkut. I thought that was pretty cool. The testimonials feature on Orkut was, I thought.
Yeah, they had the worst nickname. Send me a testy.
My first was like Tony's high five as well. And one thing I remember, and I can't believe I'm showing this to you guys, is I still remember the first profile pic. I had just started learning the guitar at that point of time. So it was kind of cool doing all those kind of things. Thankfully, our listeners will not be able to see this. I want you to tell me what you just describe in your own words what you see on screen.
I see a tree devoid of coconuts and all the oil on it on your head.
It was
This is amazing, dude.
It's shot,
it's
shot on 2005, not too far away from today. So, Naren,
this is arguably GC,
what do you think?
right?
Because this is GC. Yeah, this is on the roof.
How is your T-shirt so white? They just gave it to you for the fest, and you immediately wore it.
This is a T-shirt. No, this is a Bahrain T-shirt. You'll notice that this thing is from Bahrain. My parents just got me.
Freakishly white, dude, for a worn T-shirt.
It's not a worn T-shirt. Is what I'm trying to tell you. It's not a worn T-shirt. And in any case, I studied in chemical engineering. We have ways of. I'm very proud of this guitar. I got a Strat copy for 4,000 rupees. Anyway, enough of that eyesore. And that's the last time I promise you I'm going to use the share screen feature on Zoom while recording Simplified. And
but also
for listeners who actually want to see what that looked like, just write into us, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
Let's hear. Maybe 10 of you petition us on Twitter. Then
just on that topic, when you mentioned chemical engineering, I just remembered you keep referencing a certain reaction, right?
Yeah. Hell-Walhart Zelensky reaction.
Yeah, and now I thought that's the only other time I can now think that Zelensky is actually in mainstream conversation.
I did not realize that.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
So Zelensky. I was like, when I thought of that reaction, I was like, hey, now Zelensky is a mainstream name.
Wow.
Yeah. So is hell for him. But anyway.
Oh my God. Excellent. Yeah. So go on.
I missed out on Orkut altogether. I don't know if blog counts as a social media.
Wait, Naren, you were never on Orkut.
I was never on Orkut. Yeah.
Oh, you just jumped directly to Twitter.
Yeah, just
Facebook.
Wow.
I don't know how I got into Twitter when the one way of tweeting was to text an SMS to an Indian number and it would come on Twitter.
No way. Is that for real?
For the longest time, I was just sort of shooting off messages into the void without knowing what was happening.
Oh my
God. I realized that a whole bunch of people actually listening, or reading my messages, and then it was, I got hooked right away, straight away.
There was this relatively aged person who thought Twitter was same as the search bar, and apparently tweeted everything he meant to search.
No, but this actually feature reminds me, I do remember this, but I remember this in context of Facebook. So in the early days of Facebook, because you didn't have the Facebook mobile app, you could actually turn on notifications for a post on mobile, and you would get text on SMS. So you would get all the notifications on SMS. And if you replied to those SMSs, they would actually go and post themselves as comments on your post and reply to comments on posts. So I actually used that quite often in 2008 or so. And then obviously I got a smartphone later, but that's how you used to actually use Twitter at that time. So Twitter and Facebook. So yeah, that reminds me of that particular amazing
early days.
Time when you were also keen enough to spend money on actually posting tweets.
Those SMSs would cost, right? Yeah.
So from the glory days of using social media and spending money to do so, Chuck, what is the topic of the day?
I'm actually wondering myself because I'm actually, a part of me is tempted to keep talking about the old days of social media and how we use them, but maybe another time. So very recently, the European Union, those troublemakers, they passed something called the Digital Markets Act, the DMA. And it is an act that tries to regulate big technology firms. They even
basically sliding into their DMAs.
Well done. Well done.
Nice.
Well done. Well done.
Oh, this is what we were missing when Tony was absent.
I've always felt that, like, if I were to equate Tony to a musician, I always feel he's like Mark Knopfler, like those beautiful little bits just coming in and then going out. Not vital to the song, but just add so much color and flourish. So, Tony, thank you for being our Sultan of Swing.
Yeah, and Chuck is the Daft Punk.
Wait,
Not quite sure.
Basically, you're saying we are in dire straits because of me. Is this
done? Well played. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, so they want to regulate big tech, and I mean, it's quite obvious who they were after because they even set like criteria like this much amount of revenue, this many number of users and all that. And the EU, I mean, actually does its homework, right? So it's even differentiated between users and actual paying customers. Hence, differentiate, like solving, like clever enough to realize that just because a platform has, say, 100 million users doesn't mean that all of them are actually paying. It might only be 10,000 advertisers who are actually paying and funding the platform, etc. So it was meant to rein them in some way. And essentially what they did, the regulation is fairly huge, and there are lots of things that happened as a result of it, or rather will happen as a result of it. But there were 2-3 large points. One of the biggest ones has been a talking point for people who analyze the space is mandating interoperability. And the easiest way to explain interoperability would be with an example. So somebody using WhatsApp should be able to message somebody who uses Telegram, should be able to message somebody using iMessage, should be able to message somebody using, say, a new
Did I
Upstart
read this
app.
on Things of Internet?
Yes, you did.
Okay. Why don't you plug it?
Thank you for.
Wow. What a honest plug.
No, because like I read this exact same example. And
same
person only.
The exact same thing is what I'm going to say only. I literally have it open in front of me and I'm going to read it out. But yeah, that's one big thing that was taken.
I have to interject one Wodehouse thing. So one of Wodehouse's novels carries a preface saying that critics, that much hated tribe feature, some critics have accused me of writing stories with the same characters under different names. So I've outwitted them in this novel. I am writing the stories, the same characters with the same
names.
Chuck is reading from the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, like that. I thought you were talking about interoperability. I thought it was a commentary on different characters, same medium, something. Anyway, so that's one, interoperability. A couple of other things as well. One, which was that a big tech platform should not do self-preferential treatment, right? So, for example, Google has been known to cut off traffic to a lot of websites, not on its own, by introducing a feature that doesn't necessitate people clicking and going to a website. And we all do that, right? For us, it's a convenience to see the weather or the cricket score or the flight status right over there, but it's causing some website or app a click, for instance.
Is actually also a violation, is a form of a violation of net neutrality in some way.
Yeah.
So the concept of net neutrality, while you're talking about net neutrality in context of internet service providers, but there is also a neutrality issue when it comes to like inside the internet, simple flow of information within the internet, right? And that also is, and especially now with these big 4 tech companies having as much and controlling as many portions of the internet as possible, what they are effectively doing is they're building what are called walled gardens.
Yeah.
So in the net neutrality context, a walled garden is something on the lines of what Jio and Facebook were attempting to do before net neutrality was kind of like codified in India. where Jio had its own ecosystem where you could use Facebook and Facebook's products for free, but everything else would cost money. And that kind of created this walled garden effect. And that's precisely what Google is also trying to do in some ways over here.
Completely agree. So those are a couple of the major rulings. There are like a whole bunch of others which I won't get into. I mean, if you just search for DMA online, I mean, the Wikipedia article itself is a good explanation of it. A lot of the commentary has been focused around the interoperability aspect, and I want to use that as an example to illustrate how, which is with the topic of this, which is how damn complicated this whole thing really is at the surface.
Sorry, before you go into that, there was a similar kind of situation with Google in Australia, if you remember.
Yeah, the media thing, right? The media thing, right?
Yeah, the media bargaining law, whatever.
Yeah,
where basically the idea was that Google needs to pay a certain amount to like show news or something like that, right?
Yeah, and no, actually that's a good and they had something similar in France as well, if I remember. It's so I mean that's a great example to add to this, because all of these things together just show how damn complicated it is to regulate one of these things, right? So
and because it was Australia and not a big one, what Facebook did was it took all news off Facebook. So if you posted a news link in Australia, it wouldn't show up.
It's not necessarily a bad thing for society in general. Yeah, in fact, I remember I remember seeing somewhere newspapers or news organizations were wondering how to tackle this problem by not replying to comments or something like that to either work around this ban, or I forget exactly what it was. But yeah, so all this just shows how difficult, how complicated it is. And just want to use interoperability as an example before we jump off to other things. So on the surface, it looks like, hey, great, interoperability is a good thing. WhatsApp users should be able to message a Telegram user, whatever. It might even help younger messaging services that are innovative to come up in some way. But then there is a dark side to this as well. There's a problem, which is it might mean the end of end-to-end encryption, for instance.
Yeah.
So, one of the few things that WhatsApp has done right, I guess, is, or rather Facebook itself has been pushing for so much, is trying to have user privacy in its messaging apps. And that to a large degree has happened with WhatsApp. If a ruling like this comes in, could severely compromise privacy, and it could also lead to a lot of spam. Like Will Cathard, the now head of WhatsApp, said in an interview that, sure, while within WhatsApp we can control spam and misinformation and all that, once a message is sent from WhatsApp to a third-party service, we don't know what's going to happen over there, right? And this whole thing also throws up, and I'm just sticking with interoperability itself, just to show how many different angles are there to this one thing alone. There's an app in Germany, I forget the name, but it's a paid messaging app. It's got features of Signal and then some, super private and all that. Okay. And I think people have to pay some 10 euros a month or year or something to be part of it. Their CEO said that a ruling like this can completely destroy their only revenue stream, and which is the only thing that they can charge people for, which is for security and all that. So what if another message comes in? Are we going to say that if it's coming from a third party, we're going to block that altogether? And obviously people are going to leave the platform. What if somebody from our platform wants to message somebody who's on a non-secure platform? Now, how is that going to work out? So again, no right or wrong answers over here really. It's just that this thing is so darned complicated.
No, I mean, that guy's business folding up, I mean, which constitution has guaranteed him that his business is not going to fold up by changing policy? So that's not a good metric, right?
No, fair enough. We're not here to debate the business models as such. It's just that it is very difficult to regulate these things. I'm not even going to pass judgment on whether Meta is doing something right or this guy is.
So I'm just saying, I haven't really thought much about it.
It's a great place to start actually, because most people I've read have thought a lot about it.
So interoperability. So, let's say I'm on WhatsApp and you're on Telegram, and now you can send messages to me and I don't like it. What I should do is get off WhatsApp too.
Yeah.
Right? I don't understand. It's a function of if there is no choice at all, that's a different thing. I do have a choice. I have a choice not to be on WhatsApp. I choose to be on WhatsApp because a lot of, everything in our little universe, everything works all right. People message you on WhatsApp. They send you payment links on WhatsApp. Everything happens on WhatsApp. Yeah. So if you really feel spooked and creeped by this. So this is my thing about, Europeans. I don't know, in this case, they might be absolutely right. But Europeans love to regulate everything. Okay, they're like Indian bureaucracy on steroids. British also. They just want to regulate things because they can. Just regulate anything. And the obvious things like, can you not wear a mustache? They can't regulate that. But they regulate all this other thing. I mean, who you can talk to, what you can see on the internet, who you can. If they don't like it, they should just step away. Like over-regulation, that's my grounds. And I understand the problem because companies like Google and Facebook do end up doing a lot of very unfair shit. Facebook is absolutely a criminal enterprise. Shouldn't even call it a company. It's just downright criminal. Yeah.
So now that everybody has been battered by Naren, agree to some extent.
By the way, I have to raise my hand and say I am the only one as of now that owns some Meta stock. So
should we give this disclaimer now? Should we give these disclaimers that we
I know.
Stock
It's like that
3 shares.
That is an investor in Ken, basically.
No, fair point, Naren. And I don't want to debate about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, let's go to, as the British say, let's cross the pond and go over to the US, where they've been speaking about regulating big tech companies for years now, ever since.
Regulating or breaking up?
Yeah, so that's the thing, right? So regulation via breaking up or regulation on its own or whatever the case may be. Right?
It's more, rather than breaking up, it's more dilution of power kind of thing. Dilution of like the hegemony.
One take the hammer to it solution is, so these companies have become too large, break them up, which seems like a great rally cry in the Trump era. But analysts have shown that breaking these companies up are only going to make individual people more powerful. And the example they use is, as always, a Standard Oil example, which there was one company that got too large, antitrust came, broke it up, and then you had 16 or 17 companies birth the result, the combined worth of which was more than the original companies. So these things can have consequences that way as well. I mean, there are people who are waiting and relishing for Amazon to be broken up because AWS on its own is likely to then become the largest company in the world. And things like that. So the bigger challenge is how.
No, the only reason I brought that up was the time when I bought the stock was also the time when Facebook's valuation had reduced below the threshold where this would apply in the US. It's stock value.
Oh yeah. That was hilarious. It's back above that. Yeah. So a lot of the US rules. One of the things that makes this whole endeavor of regulating, breaking up these companies is one, how different they are from traditional companies in the past. Traditional companies, be it oil or be it shoes or be it services of some kind, all involve end users paying some money to the company in some way and getting some product or service in return. Many of these internet companies are very different in the sense that the end user, you and me, don't necessarily pay Meta or Google or anything, and we are in some sense a product that is being used, and you can argue that the actual users are advertisers who are using the platform. So in that sense, Facebook, Google and all that are B2B platforms, and we just happen to be features in some way. So that's one way in which these companies are different, which makes using past regulation as a standard very difficult, because by US antitrust rules, they're like, as long as they're paying less, it's kosher. But hey, here we are not paying anything at all. So how do you regulate a company like Google or Facebook? Right? Or do you regulate the advertiser point of view?
What is the rationale behind bringing them up? Like, what will it achieve?
Yeah, so again, complication number 3, which we will get to in a bit. The second problem, I said one problem was the current companies are so different from previous companies, so that makes regulation difficult. And the second thing is these companies are also different from each other. It's not like Facebook's business model is equal to Google's business model. And then you have Amazon in some sense, which is the largest of the lot, yet is in some way the most similar to companies of the past, where you're paying the company and getting something in return. So there it kind of makes sense. And then you have others like Microsoft and one problem that everyone has realized is that the big just keep getting bigger. And that's something that the pandemic has shown. Maybe before there was a risk of it like that not happening, but during the pandemic it's very clearly shown that whoever has market power, whoever has money sitting in coffers, be it Apple, be it Amazon, be it Alphabet, be it Meta, or even be it market leaders in this particular sectors like Salesforce, Zoom to some extent, Netflix, all of these guys have just used their existing power and their user base in order to grow bigger, invest more in R&D, to some extent squash competition, acquire competition, all that sort of thing. So I can see where this is going. I see where this sort of discomfort from a public point of view is coming as well. It's just surprising to me because all of us, at least Srikeit and me, have been observing technology firms and all that since our days in digital marketing, and we have known about the risks of targeted advertising from way back in 2012 and 13, and then suddenly in 2016, 17, the average American knew about it. The average public got to know about things like privacy and all that. So it seems like there's sort of like a groundswell against big tech companies. Well, Facebook went from being America's most trusted brand in 2017 to I think somewhere in the 40s or 50s last year. So the public image that these companies have taken is, at one level, they are more vital than ever before and being used more than ever before. At the same time, their reputation is totally in the tatters, at least in the US.
That's just a slice of the media that we are exposed to, right?
Yeah,
where the rubber meets the road is the number of users that they have, which is stands at 1.92 billion. Right, so if people were actually leaving,
absolutely, no, agreed, no, completely agree.
Tony is just justifying his stock purchase.
No, and to some extent, Facebook, as in the parent, the parent Blue app or whatever it is, there, the usage of that app is reducing. But that's the other contradiction, right? We keep criticizing big tech, but we are using them directly or indirectly more than ever before. In 2016 or 17, there was this fascinating experiment that a journalist, I think from Gizmodo, her name is Kashmir Hill, she did this fascinating experiment where for one day of the week, she would wean herself off one of the big tech players. And what that meant was not just not using the website, but also all the other things that
subsidiaries.
So on the day that she was not using Amazon, it didn't just mean not using Amazon the app or
but
website,
AWS as well,
but also everything hosted on AWS, which meant that inadvertently she couldn't use Netflix for that particular day. Similarly, Google. So Google meant no Google Maps, no Uber because it uses Google Maps, all that sort of thing. So once you get down to this, you realize how entrenched each of these companies are. Again, no judgment on any of them. It's just my whole point over here in this conversation today is how damn difficult it is to regulate these things, regulate these companies, because they're so different from companies of the past, and they're so different from each other in some sense. So if you're one of my favorite authors to follow, thinkers to follow, which I had linked out in that piece which Tony was talking about, is a guy called Ben Evans. He's a British analyst on all this. I can consider him and Scott Galloway essential reading for anyone who's interested in this space. One of his points was exactly this: if you are bringing out regulation keeping one company in mind, say Apple, you're going to see that it does not necessarily very cleanly apply to Amazon. And if you do that for Amazon, it won't be applied to Google. And even if you apply to Google, it won't be. So what is like one overarching ruling that's going to apply to everybody together? Breaking up companies might make sense in Amazon's case, but it's not going to necessarily make sense for the others. Or if it's going to be regulating, say, number of users or interoperability for one player, it may not necessarily work for the others. So overall point, just circling back, I've spoken a lot, but my point is just that simple thing. Regulating is damn difficult.
A lot of law, jurisprudence is about distilling principles which are supposed to guide policy or decision. So that's what you do. So principle of natural justice or principle, those kind of principles are things which are distilled. Now it's incredibly difficult to distill any kind of things into for in the case of big tech companies, because they are things that the human species has not encountered ever before. And that makes it very different. So because here there's a huge aspect of philosophy as well. So what when you take a very, very meta decision, I mean, meta as in meta, and
small m.
Small m. And you have to sort of resort to things like philosophy and ethics and whatnot. And then that opens a different can of beans altogether. And as far as the big tech is concerned, it's literally too complicated and complex to
Right?
even attempt that.
I think the most famous quote from Eric Schmidt quite a while back was the internet is the first thing that humanity has built that humanity doesn't understand, the largest experiment in anarchy that we've ever had, right? So it's always meant to be that way. One person I wish were around for all of this is actually Douglas Adams.
I was about to say,
on tech are actually much more profound and like visionary.
Prescient, I would say.
Prescient as well. And he just understood everything like very intuitively much before basically people got onto it, right? Like I think Chuck, on your reading group, you had posted one thing about the first sort of digital advertising one that he had spoken about. What a guy. Anyway.
And we are going to interrupt this little conversation on big tech because we need to take a break right now. So I'm going to break up this interview and be on the other side.
Nicely done.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy? If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
And now back to our conversation on regulating big tech. So guys.
Excellent.
And Anthony, no, the logo art, that photo, definitely not.
Just to put another point also, and I was just thinking back about the point that you made about the whole interoperability aspect of, say, a messaging app and how that interoperability will work. I think the other aspect of big tech that we have gotten, we need to understand is that I think at this point, any kind of regulation that would come into tech would be extremely technical and highly detailed and like would require a lot of boxes to be ticked. And at this point, the only people capable of following all these regulations without like losing massive revenue or even take a hit in losing that revenue is the big four.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So in that context, and like you were talking about that German app or any of the other apps that would be there, any kind of regulation that would be looking to break them up would only end up making them stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. I was about, in fact, they say that email is the most democratic or the ideal standard because, hey, you can have an account on Gmail and you can mail me on my, say, Hotmail account or whatever the case may be. But the fact of the matter is, even today, like there's some stat that 90% of all email is owned, or in that sense, by 3 companies. Right? Gmail is almost default, and that's a great point. All these big tech players, they actually want regulation in some way because that's going to actually entrench their own position. Facebook has been running ads for a while now that says we welcome regulation, and it's also dual purpose, right? One, it kind of like builds a moat for them, and two, it also whitewashes to some extent. One point to complicate. Go ahead.
No, I think one of the ways in which we've seen interoperability work out to some extent is the early days of Twitter, when you didn't need to use Twitter or the website. Right? You
when you use TweetDeck or Plume and all that stuff.
That was beautiful.
So then you didn't pick. You picked Twitter for the network, but you picked the specific app for the features or whatever. And to be honest, I don't know why they died out, but they did. So it died out purely because Twitter killed API access to a lot of them because they couldn't, because a lot of them were able to monetize though they could monetize it, and they were able to filter out the ads, which are now like everywhere between every 5 tweets.
So exactly. So I've been thinking about this. So do we then say regulation should be once a platform reaches a certain threshold that is just given a lot of money and then it becomes a standard rather than a privately held company that has to generate profits? Would that have solved a problem like this? Because I know what you're talking about, Tony. Those glorious old days of one person using Echophon and the other person using TweetDeck. The magnificent, that was the magnificence. That was
which is what, that's what also, it's almost referencing that point that I made earlier about that thing. It's almost like, after a point, everybody needs that common set of governing rules, like net neutrality. As far as physical internet is concerned, you have that rule of net neutrality saying that, there are certain governing principles of all internet that you need to follow. This is how it will work. Similarly, like say for example, if you are a large player and like you said, you cross a certain threshold to become a large enough player of sorts, you need to follow a certain set of governing principles of how you kind of provide your service to your users. So, but then again, I mean, that's where that is regulation, and that gets that. I mean, framing it in a way that cannot be gamed by the big tech companies is what is going to be the biggest challenge.
It's a massive challenge, right? Scott Galloway is often fond of saying that Amazon has more lobbyists in Washington than Washington has employees, or something or some stat like this. But yeah, it's insane the amount these guys spend on government lobbying, complicating all of this. Like everything we've spoken about, like we hardly have any ideal solution for one country. Now imagine that all these are actually global companies. So how do you have one regulation that spans all countries, or do you have different regulations for different countries? The thing that you spoke about, Tony or Srikeit, I forgot who, the Australian example. Now you have, look at the complications. You have, okay, how is media regulated in that particular geography? How is technology regulated in that particular geography? Now look at all the levers over here. You have culture, you have censorship, you have media laws, you have technology laws, you have online laws, and parsing all of this together, Zuckerberg is probably saying, in his cabin saying, I just wanted to rank hot women, man. Like, how the fuck did all this happen?
That's what I mean. It does become even more complicated because, I mean, fundamentally, and that's what the world has been dealing with for the past 3 decades, is that while laws and rules and regulations are geographically inclined, the internet is not. The internet is not geographically dominated. And the greatest example of it is like something like the Pirate Bay, right? The Pirate Bay, which is the grand old torrent website, which started off as this global website based in the US, then went into a safe haven in Sweden, and now like just bounces off mirrors of any country that allows for it, and then moves on to another country, which absolutely makes a mockery of any kind of physical laws that you can set anywhere. Right. And so that's where the entire thing needs to be, and that's where I think it's almost like, almost like the Kyoto Treaty or like some kind of major global treaties. There need to be treaties that go around about the internet, where I don't think there is any treaty that is global that has any kind of agreement about how the internet needs to be regulated. So and that is
a country Halloween is trick or treaty.
Trick or treat.
Scary. So go on, Tony.
No, so my basic point is, I mean, all respect to bureaucrats and journalists and all of that, but there is this thing called the gel man amnesia effect, right? Which basically says that the more you know about something, the more you realize what crap people write about it in newspapers, right? And this is like, I know I've been
you believe everything else.
Correct. You believe everything else. That's the important thing. But like the reportage on Facebook is so skewed and so bad. It's awful, right? And like as two things, as a digital marketing professional, I know how Facebook has been beneficial for the community as a whole, how it has cut out the fat of agencies, how it's basically made sure that even if you're a small business, you have a chance to start marketing. And secondly, like just the reporting is so bad. Like for instance, Facebook in its sort of annual report or whatever had this thing where you're supposed to provide future risks to shareholders as commentary, right? In which it had written that one of the risks that it sees that can disrupt your business in future, which is a guidance that you're supposed to give your shareholders, is that if European laws become very strict and does not allow for transfer of data from Europe to the US, it might lead to a stage where we need to pull out of Europe. It's been put as a risk in some footnotes somewhere in the next day. All newspapers. Facebook says it will pull out of Europe. Europe says thank you. This goes on for 20 days. Okay. And I'm like, why? Like just go and read the original source document. No, Facebook is not saying it will pull out of Europe. It's saying it is a risk that if regulation happens, then we might need to pull out of Europe. So that's my major problem with
mainstream media, right?
Yeah, so and mainstream media in turn then influences these lawmakers because they're like, oh, this is a popular, thing that I can
It
click
feeds
on.
into
the
I can
narrative.
go on
Yeah.
This
user.
was the most stark during COVID, right? Mainstream media did a lot of panic mongering, according to me. A lot of unnecessary panic mongering, at least in India and probably all over the world. And they would greatly exaggerate risks and affect policies and affect people's behavior. In a lot of countries, people scrambled for hospitals and things like that under the mistaken assumption that they were going to die. They somehow got the impression that if you get COVID, death is 100% certain. It was more like 0.5% or 1%.
Precisely, and that's where also actually, Tony, the point that you made, it's extremely important to know, is that what also is true of the internet and the world that is linked to it is that this frightful information asymmetry, right? Like there are people who are so there are people on the cutting edge of the blockchain who are envisioning worlds that there is the other end of the world that are still thinking internet as a connection, a series of pipes, right? Like they're like, oh, this is like a interconnected, very, very. I mean, there is a world that thinks that they can control what will go on the internet by banning a few sites, right? So that information asymmetry currently versus what the average knowledge of the internet and its systems and what governs it in the mainstream versus where the actual knowledge of internet is varying by the day is already causing issues, but it's also like probably the forebearer of what is going to be the differentiator for the haves and have-nots in the future, right? Where you're going to like this, where I mean, this goes even beyond just like normal education. Like if you were to see like being knowledgeable about something and being illiterate, the gulf between someone who knows about like say blockchain technology in detail versus someone who doesn't understand the internet very well is even more deeper beyond that point. So that gulf is what is the biggest. I mean, it's almost like the biggest flashpoint for the future in some way.
But there are two parts to this, right? One, you're absolutely right. There is huge information asymmetry. That's why the agencies were getting plump on one side, and obviously why tech journalism is bad on the other side. And the point is, you're always going to play catch up in this case, right? Which is to say that let's say you regulate this big tech today, it doesn't work like a COVID vaccine where now you've identified it and in future no big tech kind of situation will occur, right? It will again happen 10-15 years later with blockchain, whatever else, metaverse or whatever it is, and then the lawmakers will again be playing catch up. And to me, that is the most frustrating part, right? It's not like you've learned a lesson for the future and you're going to fix something. It's just that it is a popular thing to beat on right now, so I'll do it because it gets me some popular vote, which is why I am so blatantly mistrusting of the whole regulation system that they come into.
Clearly, I mean, this technology across the board is this many-headed mutating beast, right? Like it's not even like okay, there is a single authority responsible for mutating it or anything like that. Like it's just mutating in every different front, and you don't know, like even the person who's probably extremely knowledgeable in one area can be entirely ignorant of the other end of the spectrum, which really impacts their life. And coming back to that original point which said that it's totally that invention that we have made that we do not understand. And it also looks by design in a way that there is no way at any point any single person or group of people can ever understand the internet fully.
And to Tony's point, I think that like if there is regulation, just because of the nature of if there is some perfect regulation that covers all the big tech players today, because of the nature of the internet network effects and all that, there will be a company and there will be a business model that manages to find their way around this and start something that's completely legal, which somehow works around this entire thing. And then what do? Do you update regulations every year? Again, no rights, no wrongs anywhere. It's just how complicated this entire thing is.
Sorry, I just remembered our episode with Said Memon where he said, there is a meta to every board game. which is basically like, the best way to play it or the one that wins out. So
Yeah.
I think the meta to the internet world might be Meta itself. Sorry.
You.
Wow.
Wow.
So the one, we can go on talking about this, and we will. But the one prediction that I have, which I also mentioned in the newsletter, is I think that somehow these companies are going to try and diversify into other streams of revenue as quickly as possible. And that's mostly Alphabet and Meta that I'm talking about, because for them, both of them are well over 90% of their respective revenue still comes from one source. And we've seen how susceptible that is to being taken away. Apple, for instance, they just added one message on their screen saying, hey, do you want more privacy? And boom, that immediately affected Facebook. Again, not saying whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it happened. And these
I think that is a fundamentally good thing, right? I mean, for the maybe
fair
for
enough.
like
Again, let's not, fair enough. Let's not argue about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. The point being that these things can be taken away very quickly. So I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if these platforms start trying to diversify in various other ways. I think Amazon's very well placed in that respect. It's got massive amounts of revenue coming in from 3 different sources, which is advertising, which is, of course, their retail, and then which is AWS. And very soon they will start getting into things like health. And I'm very sure that their own devices like Kindle and Alexa are multi-billion-dollar businesses by themselves. Apple, to some extent, already has that. And what's very heartening for Apple is that their services is picking up greatly, and they've been recently talking about a hardware subscription as well. And if they ever decide to launch a car, then that's obviously going to be it. So I wouldn't be surprised if more players are going to do this, because one thing I've sort of like noticed over the years is these companies sort of anticipate and they self-regulate before regulation happens. We have seen Apple was not ordered to have more privacy. They just did that. And of course, the second thing is that it is very self-serving for many of these companies to actually put out these stances. It's great for Apple to say, oh, we are doing this for the privacy of the users and all that. But at the end of the day, it's a huge marketing tool for them as well. Similarly, when that happened, the fallout was Facebook obviously would have a hammer blow to the head. And it took out full page ads that said, oh, small businesses are going to suffer because, which is true to some extent, but it's sort of like seemed like they were trying to, that they were like, really? Like, is that really your number one concern?
Yeah, I mean, this is the equivalent of where there is on one side there is grassroots football getting developed in the UK. On the other side, there is that grassroots football is being funded by oil money and by slave labor in China. Right, like, so it's also interrelated. It's so interlinked that you can't really, like, you pull at any one strand, you can show you can do fantastic PR with it, but there's also like some really ugly stuff behind it. So I mean, that's where, which is what is the scary part of tech right now, is like there are these really, really powerful forces that will determine our future, that are currently being like, that is basically like a bunch of frat kids who are drunk on beer running around with beakers full of secret stuff that the moment they drop will change the world on an instant. Because, like, again, the example that you said about the Apple privacy thing, Apple just decided to take a specific position on a specific thing, which may very well have come from a tech solution or a certain engineer thinking one way, right? That there is no movement. It's so concentrated right now that a couple of engineers or a group of engineers or a single meeting can determine the fate of how humankind will be over the next decade or so.
It's crazy to think that. It's crazy to think that. Tony,
sorry, just a slight, sort of, I think it's already happening, but also a slight prediction in why I bought stock in Meta after the Apple privacy thing is that basically Facebook's initial years for advertising were hard, right? Like, it needed to convince people that you can advertise on Facebook. Now that has already happened. Now, even if your privacy thing kicks in, what's going to happen is that your attribution and targeting gets reduced to a certain level.
Yeah.
But then as a marketer, I'm looking at, okay, now this has been taken away by Apple, which is the channel which will give me the best returns. and the best targeting, right?
Hmm.
And inevitably, it's still going to be Facebook.
It's still going to be
right?
Facebook. Yeah, absolutely.
Which means you'll see probably a dip in advertising on Facebook for a year.
Yeah.
But they're like incredibly well placed for like 10 years from now. Plus, they have bets in their other, they've basically rebranded their company Meta. So
like hardware and all that. So like a prediction then from my side will actually be, I have a feeling we are going to see paid services coming from people who we never thought paid services would be launched by. I would not be surprised. And I'm actually still shocked that they haven't done this, that Google will actually offer sort of like a paid service to some users who actually want it. Right now, the only paid service that many of us might actually be using is when our Gmail runs out and we have to buy that extra storage. And that's only because now we have reached a point where it's become too cumbersome for us to sit and search for and delete heavy attachments, something that we wouldn't have done, we probably would have done as broke college students. I think you're going to see them trying to get out more money from people who are willing to pay more money for, say, better email management or a concierge service or something like that. I think that something like that could very easily happen. Like Twitter announced plans to do that, for example, make have a paid tier or something.
And according to, and I've just been listening to, so I've been listening to Post Corona, the Scott Galloway book, Post Corona, and I mean, in his perspective, all of these new services, from his perspective, Amazon is the one who's the best place to kind of take all of this stuff on, because I mean, they are like, I mean, Apple is just like, Apple and Amazon are fighting for that, but they're like the next $1 billion in market cap is definitely
trillion
in market cap definitely belongs to Amazon because of their entrenchment behind the scenes with AWS. And that AWS animal, even if it breaks off and forms its own company in any kind of like it's going to be huge, and it's going to be so intertwined with everything else that it's almost like a chain reaction that's begun and that nobody can stop.
Yeah. One thing that interests me about this whole thing, and okay, this is going to be, we have actually spoken about this for a long time, so this is going to be my last point on this. I know we can, if you get the four of us into a room and say the word big tech, then we can go on talking for 24 hours. Maybe we should attempt that at some point of time. So we want to do that. No, but big talk. One very interesting thing about what's happening right now is that all of these, they're not colluding with each other in any ways. They're all in the trenches together, but they're all fighting each other, because what's happened over the last few years is that they've all increasingly started getting in on each other's toes. Google is making hardware. Apple actively wants Google not to be its default search engine and is working on a privacy-focused search engine of its own. Facebook is starting to get into hardware. If Apple comes out with something else, Amazon is getting into parts of Google Shopping. Google Shopping is still a thing, and it wants to be the best destination for shopping. And there are so many intertwined things, right? Amazon's advertising revenue has grown at the expense of Google, all these sort of things. It's very interesting to see. And for people like us who like observing the second and third order effects, okay, Facebook's taken away privacy. Now, Apple has taken away privacy. And apart from the temporary dip in stock price of Facebook, what further ramifications will that have? What will that how will creative messages in the future change? How will this impact, say, the advertising that happens on Amazon? So all these dominoes are pretty interesting to pick on. So to me, that's one thing that's very interesting about this space. It's not like, so whenever there is headlines like, oh, big tech is being summoned to Washington, it's not like all four of them are joining hands and like they're all bitching about each other behind each other's back, because all of them like hate each other's guts as well. So that's one thing that's very interesting to me this time. It's not like big oil is in it together. It's not that way. It's all of these.
The best fallout of this whole privacy thing, and a headline you never thought would happen, is that Mozilla and Meta are now actually working together to get into the privacy realm. Right? So it's all going to be
and that's where I think I almost find a common analogy in some ways from with the current big tech competition and like that's happening, is almost like the colonial powers having a scramble for Africa, right? Where that entire thing was, Africa was this big unknown continent, and they discovered all of these riches and unknown and this thing, and there were, the natives were completely unaware, And these guys were like, you know what, we're going to take all of this over as quickly as possible, because like they say in Hindi, jo jahan baith gaya, wo wahan baith gaya. Right? So the point is, these guys have understood that, like, at this point, before the entire the awareness of what the internet can be and what these different assets can be comes into the mainstream focus, these guys have the awareness of it. And so that's where they are trying to occupy these positions. Like Apple has taken up on privacy. Facebook is trying to fight it before this privacy stuff becomes standard. And different guys are trying to scramble for different parts of the internet before, like, there is a certain point of no return that gets passed, and then they can kind of squat on the area that they are in and defend that. So that's
well
what.
Said.
That's
well said. Really well said. Yeah, it's scary to think that the internet hasn't been fully built yet, and for all you know, we might just be on the cusp, early days of the internet in some sense. So
pretty much. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. I think okay, this was extremely wide ranging. So what have we learned? Today? One, this whole entire thing is complicated. Two, Tony has meta stock. I think that has been reasonably well established, and we will give that as a disclaimer now for each, even if it has nothing to do with Facebook. Because
we should also record, like, we've already done an episode on the Sri Lankan crisis, and we need to give Tony's disclaimer there also.
And we have also learned that Naren is so wise because, unlike the rest of us Philistines, he has gained all his knowledge through oral traditions that have been passed down.
Fantastic.
So I think Naren, Simblified is an oral tradition, and I think it should be passed down.
Wow.
Wow. I did not think that was that profound, but given your reaction, I think we should actually give that. Somehow feel that should be our. Have we finally found our tagline? Simplified is an oral tradition.
Podcast are an oral tradition.
Excellent.
Fair
wow.
Enough. So we have reached no conclusion, right? So just
no, nothing to conclude here. I think just
as the big four, we all.
We are the big four.
Yeah.
For sure.
So and the only conclusion, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So just two things. One, if you want that photo of me with a guitar on top of my college roof, then just ping us and let us know. And two, of course, is Naren sign off. So
So the only takeaway from this whole thing is stay safe, stay oral, and stay simplified, right?
That was not the way I thought this episode would end, but sure. Let's take it.
Naren with missionary zeal.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Aditya Raj Kapoor, a long-distance biker, tells Cyrus all about his exciting solo travel around the world. On the Filter Coffee Podcast, Ujala Chaudhary talks to Karthik about growing up as an adopted child. On The Habit Coach, Ashton talks about how we can put on our explorer's hats and seek adventure. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk analyze the implications of simultaneous elections in India. And on Say No to Drama, Chetna helps us identify green flags in relationships. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you enjoyed this show or any of our other shows for that matter, do please tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. You can check us out on YouTube as well. On ivmpodcast.com/YouTube, we have a list of all of our YouTube channels. Do check out if your favorite show is available as full video. We are also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We'd really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it out. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors for this week, SBI Life Insurance, India Water Portal, and Jupiter, a digital banking app. Thank you so much for making this possible.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcasts website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.